Story in Greater Cambridge, the challenges people face, to speak to them about the opportunities for how the Greater Cambridge Partnership could use its future investment to really help them get on a bit better in life and also within their communities. There were three elements really to this piece of work. One was the very general big conversation where we spoke to people about transport, housing, skills, smart and how that might help them. And then there was a real focus on transport, and this was to really help inform the future investment strategy development in 2018 in terms of people's priorities, options and preferences, and essentially what was on their wish list. And we also spoke to people and tested some of the concepts in developing plans for that transport strategy. Sistra, who will present to you, carried out a residence travel survey. Travel for Cambridgeshire, carried out a much wider self-selecting survey. That's not really included in here. That work is still ongoing, but you'll get that full report in the next meeting cycle. I can say the levels of engagement during the conversation itself were really high and really positive. I've presented with this brochure today just so you don't have to read the tiny documents that you have. But pages 4 and 5, for interest, will outline the full impact and the reach of the campaign that we've ran. Before I hand over to Mike, who's just going to quickly talk through the very high-level overall findings, I just wanted to make the point that we're presenting these interim findings. There will be another report coming forward, but this really is a really rich data set that will keep on giving. So when you look at future plans and future proposals, particularly around transport, you can continue to interrogate this data to understand people's views and also isolate particular groups or particular geographic areas to understand whether people support or they have very strong views on things going forward. So I'll hand over to Mike quickly before we
Okay, I'll limit myself to just a couple of points, given where we are with the agenda and time. Overall, looking for the responses from the public, particularly to the big conversation survey, and there's strong support for the strategic goals of the GCP, but then there's a lot of what people have to say about the manner of delivery in terms of the whole range of solutions that people are looking for and the mix of solutions and the development of a system, if you like, that works. People, yes, there's the emphasis on focus on infrastructure. People are also talking about what we're doing in terms of behaviour shift and getting people, already heard about getting people to change their behaviours in relation to their travel habits. People were talking about, yes, we need carrots to get people to change in terms of their travel behaviours, but also recognise that at some points you're going to have to put in some quite punitive measures in order to force some people to change. But the message there really was put in the viable alternatives first and then come along with those punitive, more drastic, more punitive measures later on. One of the surprises that came out was the extent to which people talked about the extent of growth in the local area and how that was also not just making physical changes, but also changing a bit the feeling and the culture of the area. You know, whether it's parts of Cambridge or parts of South Cambs, people were observing about how the area was changing in terms of culturally and behaviourally. There was also this concept around being smart, and we started off within the consultation of talking about just smart as in terms of autonomous vehicles. And actually people wanted to have a bigger conversation about how we were being smart in terms of our use of design, even if it's design in terms of ticket machines or design in terms of designing the environment for people with disabilities to move around easier. So I wanted to really expand the idea of smart and how design came into the whole area. And then we touched on housing, and housing became a big issue during the conversation, and a tremendous number of people were talking about the issues and struggle in terms of accessing housing in particular. The last point really is then just what the whole body of work will be used for. Going to help us design strategy going forward, thinking about what the overall strategy is. Certainly when we come to looking in 2020 around the gateway, where we start talking to government about releasing the next tranche of money and how we've done so far, then there's a block of evidence we can call on and show government in terms of how we're doing and communicating with people. Certainly what you can hear from Sistra next is some of that evidence as well. And then finally, when we come to making some of the key decisions around some of the bigger schemes, infrastructure schemes that are there, as well as responding and feeding back the results of the specific consultation on those schemes, we then refer back to the big conversation and think about what people were telling us overall and in general about what they were looking for us to achieve. I'll leave at that point and hand over to
Thank you. Thank you. Right, I will get that out of the way and welcome Liz, Sophie and Carrie to present their report.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting us to present the Cambridge Travel Survey to you. I'm just going to give a very quick introduction and overview of the research context and the objectives. Sophie Murphy is then going to talk about the research methodology, and Liz Boast will run through the key findings of the research. In particular, she's going to look at the potential and the appetite of residents to shift away from their cars into more sustainable transport modes. She's going to highlight the changes in people's travel patterns between this 2017 survey and the census in 2011, and look at the types of intervention that's most likely to encourage people out of their cars. So just a very short introduction to Sistra. We're an independent research consultancy specialising in evaluations and quantitative research, specifically in the transport industry and primarily for central and local government. And we were commissioned to undertake this research with Cambridge and South Cambridge residents to try and get a better picture of their current travel behaviours. Also to understand the reasons for their current travel behaviours, why they're travelling the way that they do. And third, to look at the potential to encourage them to use other modes of transport and how this can be achieved. The findings of the survey will be used to support the design of the transport strategy, so to reduce congestion, encourage modal shift and shape investments from 2020. So Sophie's going to talk about the research methodology.
So the methodology we used was what we called CATI, which is computer-aided telephone interview, so over the phone. This took place in autumn last year, and the telephone numbers were compiled from the Operator Services Information System, and they're then dialed at random at various times of the day and days of the week. We set some quotas to make sure that we got a representative sample in terms of district, age and gender. We offered a small prize draw to encourage participation, and following the collection of data we did some weighting to ensure it was fully representative. Next slide. Going on to the data weighting. Weighting adjusts the data to give a weight to different responses so that overall the responses better reflect the people that we're interested in. For example, in our survey, 42% of our respondents came from Cambridge, whereas 58% came from South Cambridgeshire. Looking at the official statistics out there, in actual fact, 47% came from Cambridge and 53% from South Cambridgeshire. That means we slightly oversampled South Cambridgeshire, so to counteract this, we applied weightings to bring the proportions back in line, and this meant it better reflected the population that we were interested in. We could also undertake some segmentation analysis to look at different subgroups within the population. Next slide. Onto the questionnaire itself. It took around 10 or 15 minutes to complete on the phone. It was designed to capture lots of different things, respondents' demographics, that's age, gender, working status, their current travel behaviour in and around Cambridge, that's the modes they used and what they're using for. The reason they make the travel choices that they do, alternative travel modes, that's modes that might be available to them or that they might be encouraged to switch to, and the likelihood of various potential initiatives that they might have on their travel choices. Liz is going to talk about that.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through some of the key headline findings from the research. The first being that the survey seems to show that there is both potential and appetite for modal shift away from car and van. So, as you can see on the slides, overall, our sample as a whole, there were 68% of people who said they use car or van for at least some of their journeys in and around Cambridge, and 56% of these said they would like to make more journeys without their own car or van. Within that 56%, we looked at different demographics, and we could see that
the 25 to 49-year-olds were more likely to say they'd like to shift their travel mode than other age groups, and similarly females were more likely than males to say that they'd like to do that as well. If you break the sample down by Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire residents, you can see that a similar proportion still say they'd like to make more journeys without their caravan, 57%, 56%, but you can see that actually a much larger proportion of South Cambridgeshire residents currently use their caravan to make journeys. And obviously with South Cambridgeshire being the larger population of the two areas, that would suggest there that targeting South Cambridgeshire would potentially give you a greater modal shift. It should be noted that South Cambridgeshire residents were more likely to see bus as an alternative to caravan, whereas Cambridge residents were more likely to see cycling as an alternative. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is just in line with what I just said. We asked caravan users on the journeys they make by caravan, could they make these using any of the following modes of transport instead. Bus, minibus and coach services, where overall the most likely mode people would say they could transfer to, with bicycle coming second. But as I just said, if you look at Cambridgeshire and South Cambridgeshire separately, the bus is more likely alternative for South Cambridgeshire and bicycle is a more likely alternative for Cambridge. However, it should be noted that quite a large portion did say no alternatives were available to them. 39% overall, 44% of South Cambridgeshire residents said no alternatives compared to 32% of Cambridge residents. So South Cambridgeshire residents see it as a more likely to not see there being an alternative. We asked people about why they weren't currently using the alternatives available to them. And these are the top 7 reasons given, with the most likely reasons being speed of journey and reliability of journey. But price of transport was the third reason, most popular reason given for not using alternatives, but actually that was far more likely among Cambridge residents than South Cambridge residents. I'm going to move on to the comparison between the 2017 survey that we've just done and the 2011 census. So we asked respondents who said that they made commuting journeys, what mode of transport they used for those journeys specifically. And this question was also asked in the 2011 census. We made sure they were comparable questions. And you can see that the proportion of people who use caravan as a driver has slightly increased in the last 6 years. And it also appears that there's been a shift between bicycle and travelling on foot, with more people cycling now than they were in 2011, but less people travelling on foot. That change is more dramatic in Cambridge than it is in South Cambridgeshire. I think I was about to say it on the next slide actually, so if we go on. Yes, there's the difference between Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. So you can see that the increase in travel by bicycle in Cambridgeshire is more dramatic than the increase seen in South Cambridgeshire. And similarly, the decrease in walking and running in Cambridgeshire is more dramatic than the decrease in South Cambridgeshire. However, the increase in travelling by car or van is more dramatic in South Cambridgeshire. So as part of the survey, we asked respondents to consider 32 different potential initiatives to encourage changing transport mode out of the caravan. they were asked, for each one they were asked to what extent it's likely or unlikely to change their travel behaviour, either very likely, somewhat likely or not likely at all. And then from the responses they were given, scores were calculated and the 32 initiatives were ranked in order of likelihood to encourage change. These are just the top 5 initiatives that came out from that process, but overall and for Cambridge and South Cambridge separately. The top 3 of the red, which was overall new public transport routes, more reliable services on public transport and cheaper public transport fares, are the top 3 overall, and they also are in Cambridge's top 5 and South Cambridge's top 5. The differences between Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire are the settled items. So in Cambridge, better offers on public transport tickets and improved cycle park facilities also came out in their top 5. Whereas in South Cambridgeshire, free parking at park price sites went to the top of the list, and it was significantly more important, or came out higher than in the Cambridge responses. And similarly, more frequent services on public transport was more important to South Cambridgeshire residents than Cambridge residents. You'll note that all of these initiatives are carrots, using the words that Mike used. So they're all sort of positive things for the transport user. Only 6% of those who currently make journeys by caravan said that none of the proposed initiatives would encourage them to reduce their caravan use. There was a slight difference between Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, 4% for South Cambridgeshire and 8% for Cambridge. And then I just wanted to show you what the bottom 5 were as well. I didn't want to give you a list of 32, wouldn't have been very easy to digest in this environment, but it's in the report. So this is just the bottom 5 as well. The same 3 were bottom across overall and for Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. That was provision of travel planning advice, introduction of a workplace parking levy and fewer on-street parking spaces. So they were all the least likely to encourage behaviour change for everyone. Season ticket loans dropped into the bottom 5 for Cambridge, and flexible working hours dropped into the bottom 5 for South Cambridgeshire. As I mentioned on the previous slide, they were all carrots. You'll see there's a mix of carrots and sticks in the bottom 5. In the list of 32 initiatives, there were only 4 sticks, as it were. 2 parking initiatives, which have obviously been very unpopular because they are in here. And the other 2 sticks were a form of road charging and a pollution charge, and they both came out somewhere in the middle of the 32 initiatives, so they weren't in the top 5 or the bottom 5, they're in the middle. You can also see from this one that work-related initiatives didn't seem to come out very well. We did look at those for people who are working versus people who aren't working, and although people who are working might have been a bit more favourable to them, a bit more likely to say they would encourage change, they were still all ranked in the lower half of the list, so still not up. I think just to summarise that last 2 slides, then in general, public transport improvements such as frequency routes, fares, speed, etc., all came out sort of towards the top of the list. They were the most likely to encourage change. Walking and cycling infrastructure improvements and charging mechanisms, like I said, the road charging, pollution charging, sort of tended to rank in the middle of the initiatives, and the least favourite were the softer initiatives such as travel planning and workplace initiatives.
Thank you very much. I'll send you back in the middle. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, thanks very much for that presentation. It's always good to base our decisions on evidence. So, thank you very much. It is an observation I'll make, actually. If you look on page 12, and that's encouraging modal shifts. And the top 4 things that will encourage modal shifts are all things, because our buses are operating on a commercial basis, are things we have no control over. 99% of our buses in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire are run on a commercial basis by Stagecoach and Whippet, and all these things, the 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, new routes with more reliability, cheaper fares, more frequency, are all out of our control because they are run at the moment on a commercial basis. So I do hope that the Mayor takes this into account when he's reviewing bus services and takes the leap and brings in franchising, because I believe that without franchising we can't achieve this. And just to give you an example, I heard today that my village at the moment has a 15-minute bus service. That is being halved next month by Stagecoach to every half an hour, and that half an hour bus service is an hourly service on the 1 and an hourly service on the 3. So while we are doing our utmost to get people onto public transport, unfortunately our commercial bus operators are doing their utmost to scare people away, and their main priority is the profit for their company, not getting people onto public transport in Cambridge. And that's unfortunately the truth.
Thank you. Claire Ruskin.
I just wanted to ask about how statistically significant these numbers are. So my quick sum is that there are 100,000 people in Cambridge and 100,000 journeys in and out of Cambridge each day, and you've sampled 1,000 people, so that's 0.5%. And then you're talking about evidence between 4 and 6% of views. So it's great that it is some evidence, but is it, in your view, statistically relevant?
Are you all right with? I've got 2 more down here at the moment. If we do those and then come back to them at the end. So, Helen Valentine.
Thank you. I think there's some good stuff in here. I'm a little bit sceptical, I think, about the charts on page 12 and 13, particularly the disincentives. Am I really going to fess up to an introduction of a workplace parking levy wouldn't influence my behaviour? Because if I do fess up to that, you're more likely to do it than not. So when Virgin write to me saying, am I happy to pay more for my sports package, I say no. Actually, I won't leave even if they do charge me more, but I don't want to encourage them to charge me more by saying yes.
You know that's gone on the internet later on. Unlucky. Virgin will be after you. The only other, I'll cancel a bit because I've got me here, so you go and
I wanted to first congratulate the people who did this. I know that it's been an enormous exercise and a lot of engagement has gone on, and I think that it's being presented to us in a very helpful way. I think what it doesn't do is kind of clinch any decisions, but I don't think that's really the benchmark, the success criteria for it. And so I think that's okay, because I think it does help us and ought to help us in some respects. And I know that some people might believe that I'm a broken record on the subject of raising road charging, and I've done that because I have run up against a brick wall in terms of the board in being willing to entertain that as an option of method of going forward. I think that there is evidence in here that ought to encourage the board, even embolden the board, to recognise that people, and it says in the summary, I think it's as good words as any, exceptionally high support for improvements to public transport. I mean, that seems to me like the main headline that I can see out of this. And if those sort of aspirations are to be met, they aren't going to come without a cost. And we also see, and I think it's reasonably summarised here, that there is a willingness on the part of people participating in this to entertain the concept of road charging, amongst other things. And in fact, I think amongst the sticks it fared rather well. But it's not to say that this is the right time to argue about that policy, but it is the time to say that really this ought to be used in what evidence ought to be used for, in a way that evidence ought to be used for, and that is to actually encourage people to talk back to the public now, based on this, about a bit more what these things could mean, so that they can make more of an advanced judgment about these sort of options. Because if we are really talking about trying to achieve the meet the need for exceptionally high support for improvements in public transport, we're going to need to find a way of paying for it. And one of the things that I think we'll find if we do look into it further is that the way we get resources to do the maximum amount of that tends to lead you to consider things like low pricing. And so we're not to say that's ought to be an immediate decision, but it is to say that it ought to be taken on board as an option, and we ought to be able to kind of maturely release a little bit of the taboo around that subject and talk in a more business-like and open way with the public about it.
Thank you, Councillor Vick. I just wanted to sort of touch a little bit on where Councillor Williams was coming from about it's areas that we have no control over, and particularly buses, and particularly the potential for the Mayor of the Combined Authority to do something about bus franchising, because that is something that the Mayor of the Combined Authority does have the power to do. The powers to do that were put in the buses bill. Throughout the campaign for in the competition for the election of the Mayor, he was very, very resistant and reluctant to talk about buses or do anything about buses. And I think there is a good deal of evidence that we're seeing here that should be put to the Mayor so that he can, as I said, do something that he actually has the power to do. Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, all those observations have been on the Sistra element of the big conversation. But let's not forget all the work that Beth and her colleagues did on the rest of the big conversation, which was a very big conversation. And I'd just like to highlight some of the other findings, and maybe others will touch on some of the other ones as well. So I'd like to highlight paragraph 312 on page 203. That the vast majority of people now recognise the supply of affordable housing as the critical issue for the sub-region. That's a point which motivates me, drives me, and keeps me going as a councillor in the face of quite a lot of opposition in all sorts of ways. And in the smart section on page 204, there's an appetite for technologically advanced solutions, and let's see how we can help bring those to the palms of people's hands.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what you've discussed is there's been a big response. There's lots of exhibitions around. I mean, there's 38 public events, over 10,000 responses. And I think this is not only useful information for us in this assembly and the board, but actually for a much wider audience. And I've turned back because I've written them down, which is actually district and city councils, bus operators, combined authority, parish councils, officers who work in planning departments, MPs, also the biomedical centre, our large employers. So perhaps one of my thoughts that I've listened is, should this be distributed to a much greater audience, and maybe there needs to be some work that does that. When we've got the complete data, I think is the time to do it. It's not now necessarily, but I think when we've got the complete data, and actually perhaps inform them about it, because actually it is quite a strategic direction for lots of people.
Thank you, Ian. So if you would like to answer the questions that there were.
You did the ones that are to do with the survey.
of questions. The first one from yourself about statistical significance. So there was a target of sample of 1,000, just over that. In our opinion, that does give you robust results. A sample of 1,000 has a confidence interval of plus or minus 3%, which means, and this is a completely made up statistic I'm just going to give you now, so don't write it down. But if, for example, 50% of people said they were satisfied with the bus service, then you could be sure that the true value for the population of interest lay between 47 and 53%. That's pretty good confidence interval. In terms of question from over here about people not answering a question honestly, it's true that that type of question is open to policy bias. But I think given, there were 4 sticks in there, as I mentioned, 2 to do with parking and 2 to do with road charging, pollution charging, and actually given that not all 4 sticks were in the bottom section of the ranking, I think that shows that people have answered with at least some honesty, because we've got the 2 charging ones up in the middle there. Hopefully that answers your question.
Can I just add a couple of bits, but I won't go too long. Just on that last point as well, we had the chance to talk to people qualitatively about what they thought about the road charging, and I'll go back to the point I made, which is around there were people willing to accept it provided they had what they saw as a viable alternative in place first. It was that bit, and we had that quite an extended conversation around with businesses around that particular point in particular during the discussions. On the significance bit, I've also got my colleagues in Travel for Cambridge here who's collected another sort of over 7,000 responses just to top up that sample. So like the sister stuff was unsure, and then we've done our own effort. So I've got about 7,000 responses to the same question set, plus a few extra ones which I can add in, and then with those together I can then look at different groups in the population with more confidence as well. Have I said anything else? That we will go back and publish eventually some of the qualitative responses people have left for us online, so you can have a look at those, and if you want you can search for the word stagecoach and see what people said.
Rachel.
And on that point, I was just going to come back to Councillor Williams' concerns. The Combined Authority is commissioning a review of bus services, as most people are aware, so I think there is a route to answer some of the challenge you've set. But I would also say that actually I think what came out number 1 as being what we need to do to encourage modal shift was about new public transport routes. That is actually within our gift, and obviously what we spend a lot of time developing and devising. And actually I think the way to make, whether it's franchised or a commercial operator, we need to make public transport attractive, and that is about reliability and all the other things that were said in there, and that is in our gift to do that. And the more people that use it, then that it will become a more viable system.
Thank you. Councillor Bajan has indicated. Go on.
Chair, just a little one. If you look at the statistics, we're looking at something like 60% of people within Cambridge are travelling to work by bike or by foot. Is there anything that we've done within any of this research where people have said they would be prepared to travel by bike or by foot if it was safer within the city of Cambridge? Is there anything within the data that talks about that?
The majority of where people call on the safety stuff is around, we've got a lot of comments back from people saying, can you do something about the school run? All right, can you do something about the south of the city? We know there are people coming in from South Cambs and then driving all the way to their school run, and can you do something about it? You stop at the park and ride site, then transfer to a bike or a bus, and then make the rest of your journey, some sort of last mile. But there's a lot of people complaining about the school run, and we also, on the balance of that, got people saying, actually, I would do the school run, whether it's around the city or a bit further out, if it was safer. Because I'm looking at cycling with my kids and all that sort of thing. So there's an emphasis on safety, particularly from parents. That's certainly there.
There was something on the quality of cycleways, actually, so not necessarily safety, but it puts people off because the quality of the cycleways isn't good enough. So that was definitely something that came through both qualitatively and quantitatively.
Was there a statistic you could associate with that?
In my head, no.
No.
But we can find it and send something to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, I haven't forgotten your summing up, Vice Chair.
Oh, you're coming to it now, are
Coming
you?
to it.
Oh, right. Okay. The reason we're doing this, by the way, is that it sort of came out of the governance review, and there was some anxiety as to the accuracy and completeness of what was being reported from the Assembly to the Board, and so one of the purposes of doing this little summation is to make sure that I've captured the gist and haven't misinterpreted it too far. So there were some questions about the statistical methodology, but that was answered by an assurance that it was 3% confidence interval, and that seemed to satisfy everyone, as it should. So another question about the honesty of responses, in particular the sticks. And I think very interesting that of the 4 sticks, 2 were at the bottom, but 2 were in the middle, and the 2 in the middle were the air quality charge and some sort of road pricing. And that led to one of our members rehearsing the fact that if you are looking to be able to subsidise improvements in public transport, then some means of paying for them is needed, and so perhaps the conversation should go there in future. And of course, many commentators about the fact that the top 5 included many aspects of improving public transport services, and that led to a rehearsal of the quality of the bus service that we enjoy in Cambridge and its surroundings, and a reference was made to the Mayor's, the Combined Authorities Bus Services Review, and the power that the Mayor of a directed elected Mayor of a combined authority has to implement franchising. Given my own interest in bus services review, I don't think I'll go further into that because we await the outcome in due course. And finally, I mentioned not to forget the other aspects of the big conversation, which it seemed I was the only person to touch on, but I think we should commend all the officers involved for the efforts that they went to in reaching out very widely across Cambridge and out of Cambridge, and to have received so many responses is very heartening. And as Councillor Bates said, I think we should publish those findings as widely as possible.
Yeah, indeed. Thank
I
you.
think we could add something to that about the significance of cycling. Keep that high on the agenda, because if we can reduce the amount of traffic, we can probably pro-rata increase the amount of cycling. We need to ask that question.
I'm looking forward to a tipping point where the majority,
Where we were having a conversation.
the majority of people who work in Cambridge commute to their workplaces by bicycle or on foot. At which point, I think the political conversation will change significantly.
Thank you for
Very
involving
short
in the chair.
point. Can I just thank everyone involved in this, because in the early days we were banging on all the time about data lack of and communication lack of, and this has really transformed it. So you've got a great deal of work in here. Thank you.
Yeah, I would, in concluding this, would echo that. Thank you to everybody that did all the work in both areas, the big conversation and in the survey. There's a lot of extremely useful information that this assembly and board really need for moving forward. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on from there. There's some recommendations. This will all go to the board